Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a few questions now. Remember the rules. You have to have a microphone to ask a question. Okay, I have someone right here. Please stand for us if you would.
How long has it been since you have been in Botswana?
Thank you very much for that. Yeah, about 6 weeks or two months. I was in Botswana in February, yes, I was there for about just over a week. I usually go to Botswana every year. This year, I think I'll probably go on 2 occasions, I very much enjoy going there just to get the feel of the place again, to listen to what people are talking about, and so on. So the Botswana I write about in the books is a sort of, I suppose there are some anachronisms in it. I don't follow chronological requirements too closely, because I think that fiction should try to transcend considerations of time to an extent. So I'm talking about Botswana anywhere between the 1980s and yesterday, and so it's located somewhere there, but it's a bit vague. So I don't really bring in many modern developments. And there's a whole shopping mall that I studiously ignore because I don't like it, and so we don't. And the other thing, in none of my books, well, in fact, I suppose occasionally we have reference. I just told you a story from Scotland Street, which had reference to a cell phone, but cell phones don't come into the books. And so I just adopt the approach that anything I don't like, I ignore. Which is one way of getting through life, actually. I can, denial has a bad press, but there are strong arguments. Denial and hypocrisy are quite good.
Thank you so much. Will there be any other video representations of the #1 Ladies Detective Agency?
Thank you for that. Yes, I was very pleased. Well, yes, I can say yes. So I'm told. I was in New York last week, and I had a meeting with the head of HBO, and he was telling me about their plans. And they've got script writers doing the scripts for 2 full-length feature films, which they're making on that. So that is good news. Of course, the film industry is odd. It has a different sense of time from ordinary mortals. So words mean different things in the film industry. Soon, for example, means in the next 20 to 25 years. Immediately means about the next 4 or 5, sometime in the next 4 or 5 years. I sold the film rights in that particular series of books years ago, and then what happened was that I had lunch with the film people once a year. That seemed to be what they had in mind. And so I would have lunch with these people, and they'd say, we're just about to begin, we're really on the point of beginning, we're getting everything lined up, we're going to start. And I'd say, see you next year for lunch. And I've decided that next time I sell film rights, I'm going to sell them directly to a restaurant, which I should be a quicker way of doing it. But they did a very good job, HBO and the BBC, they really did. You know, it really was fantastic. Thank you. I mean, I deserve credit for it. I mean, my role, I was a consultant in the contract. Now, I know, and we all know, that if you want to give somebody a role which involves nothing to do, you call them a consultant. It's a well-known trick. It's the oldest trick in the book. And I fell for it immediately and said, oh, great, I'm going to be a consultant. And that means absolutely nothing at all. So, but I thought they did a really, really good job, because it's obviously worrying for an author when you actually hand over the interpretation of your work to somebody else interpreting for a different art form. And it can be a little bit worrying, but I wasn't too worried, because Anthony Minghella was in charge, and he couldn't make a bad film if he tried. He was such a wonderful filmmaker. It was very tragic. It was his last film, and in fact he died on the day of the premiere in London. I remember I arrived at London Airport from Edinburgh, and as I got out of the plane, my mobile phone rang, and it was the producer saying that Anthony had died. It was very, very sad sad occasion, but they went ahead with the showing that night. His family wanted them to do that. But it was a beautiful film, and it was filled with love, that film, the first film which kicked off the series. And Jill Scott did a really, really good job, as did Annika Noni Rose. I thought they were superb actresses, and neither of them had been to Africa before. They hadn't been to Africa before, and they got the accent just perfect. I spoke to the voice coach when I was in Botswana and visited the set when they were filming it, and she said, you know, I haven't had much work to do. That lady's got such a good ear. I suppose as a singer, Jill Scott would have that really good ear for accents. But it was really, really very, very well done, and I was delighted with the result. And there was no real disturbance of the ethos of the books, which was really, really important. So, and the third of the 6-part series, series you may recall the one where the American lady goes to Botswana to look for her son. That was the most beautiful bit of filmmaking, the most moving, lovely bit of filmmaking. The scene where the little girl's interpreting for her grandfather was just absolutely wonderful. Sorry, you've been waiting to ask a question, and I've been going on about films, but please.
No problem. Could you tell us a little bit about your writing routine and day-to-day, how it works?
Yes, certainly. One of the things as an author that you have to be is disciplined. I think Hemingway made some very firm remarks on that subject. That you actually really have to discipline yourself. And if you don't discipline yourself to a certain regime, books tend not to get written. And the idea of waiting for inspiration is bad news as an author. I mean, it just doesn't work. So I tend to get up very early. So I'll get up at about 4 in the morning, and then I write until about 6:30, and then I go back to bed and go back to sleep. And I find the second sleep is actually really very restorative. And then I get up and have breakfast. Sorry, this is probably very boring. Go on, I mean, I'm not. One's own day is very fascinating to oneself, but not to other people. So I like telling people your dreams. You know, dreams are very interesting to us, but very boring. Other people's dreams are extremely boring. But since I started, I may as well finish. And so then we'll write in the morning. Most of the morning is dealing with correspondence. We have a lot of correspondence. And then I might write in the evening. So I write about 3 hours a day is the short answer to your question. And I'm very fortunate, and I'm very conscious of my good fortune in that I don't actually have to think what I'm going to say. I go to a sort of trance, what I think a psychiatrist would call a mildly dissociated state. So I go to this dissociated state, and it just comes out. And it comes out in finished form. I really don't, and it comes out at 1,000 words an hour. Sorry, I'm not boasting, I'm just telling you what and it really is, it's an extraordinary thing. I don't quite hear a voice, but somehow what I'm doing is that I'm accessing the subconscious mind, which I think is where fiction is often created, because the subconscious mind is always interrogating the world and asking what. So I'm just going into that, and it's all there, and it's being produced in processes over which I have no real conscious control. So that's the way it works. And it would have to work that way. If I'm writing 4 or 5 books a year, I have to do it. It has to come into a sort of automatic spirit writing. Not a term I should perhaps use. But,
thank you for your time. I was just wondering if you had any input as to who plays your characters.
in the films?
Yes.
Well, that's interesting. Thanks for that question. What actually happened was that when they were casting, looking around for the people to play the characters, they had great trouble. They had casting agents in Johannesburg, London, and Hollywood looking for characters, actors to play these roles. And wherever I went in the world, I was pursued by traditionally built actresses who said, "I'm Mara Motsui, you must choose me, I'm Mara Motsui." And for example, in South Australia. I was doing an Australian tour, and I arrived in Adelaide, and I went to the hotel, and I checked in, and they said, "Oh, there's a lady waiting for you." And I thought, "Ah, yes." And I turned around, and there was a traditionally built actress with her portfolio.
From your biography, and indeed from the introduction, between the world of writing and a high-level world of ethics, it would sound like you have several lives. Of course, you have only one, and I wonder how they play on each other.
Thank you very much for that. I assume that there is influence, and even if the influence is at a subconscious level, it must be obviously profound. So I don't know whether one looked at my books and you said, could you determine what my professional interests had been? I suppose if you looked at the Isabel Dalhousie books, you'd realize that I was interested in ethical issues and in philosophy and perhaps some professional association with that. But also, I am a lawyer by background, and I was a professor of medical law at Edinburgh University, and so other people say, well, has the fact that you're a lawyer actually had much effect on the books? It's difficult for me to tell, although in the first book, the number one ladies detective agency, I did use one or two real cases that I had seen when I was working in Botswana. The case of the baptism in the river that actually happened. I saw the court papers on that, and the Reverend had taken 6 sinners down to the Limpopo River and had immersed them in the river, and only 5 came out. And a crocodile was lurking. So I used that in these, and that was a very unfortunate case. Mind you, it's very good circumstances to go. I mean, if you're going to go, you're going to go directly.
I was wondering, since you write so many books a year on various serial characters, are you ever working on more than one at the same time? They overlap, and how do you not get confused?
Well, thank you. I do. I usually write 2 books at the same time. So at the moment, I'm writing volume 7 of the Scotland Street books, and also the Isabel Dalhousie volume 8. So I'm writing 2 at the same time. So because of the number of books, it means inevitably there will be an overlap. But I just say to myself, where am I, before I sit down, so that I don't suddenly. Oh, I once did. I gave a manuscript of a Mara Matsuri novel to my editor in New York, Edward Castermeyer, who's a very fine editor, very attentive editor. And Edward said to me, "Oh, look on page 86 or whatever. Mara Matsuri suddenly starts talking like Isabel Dalhousie." And I looked, and indeed he was right. And she'd suddenly become Isabel Dalhousie. So we were able to deal with that. And that hasn't happened very much, I'm happy to say. Or, well, let's not speak too soon.
I'm particularly grateful you mentioned the automatic accessing of information. Thank you for that. And I'm curious, at least in the 3 of your series I've read, there's always in the women's voice.
Yes.
In a woman's voice. Is that a choice of yours? That just happened? Say something.
Well, you may notice I'm wearing a skirt. I find that helps. I find that helps. No, I think it's important. I don't know why I have female protagonists. I also write about men, so I mean I've got quite a lot of male characters, but I do have some important, strong female characters, which is probably unusual. I suspect that most male authors don't actually have female heroines in their book, whereas of course women novelists do. They often have male protagonists and do it very well, and they get the male psychology really well. But I think that if you did some sort of statistical, empirical work on the frequency of male authors writing about females, you probably find that it's relatively rare. Although I don't think it's a big issue. I think that obviously as an author you have to be able to put yourself into the shoes of other people. You have to be able to empathize with other people. So as a male author, you've got to be able to get into women's shoes. In fact, some male authors like that. But that's another issue. We'll get there.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have a brief time for questions. This will be our last question, and then we're going to ask that you remain seated, and then we will go line up for the book signing. I apologize, we couldn't get to everyone. There's just not enough time. We have over 300 people here, and he has a plane to catch tomorrow. So this is our last one.
The one book you haven't mentioned is one of my true favorites. I've loved them all. But Laz Orchestra Saves the World is not a serial novel. It's very much about tonight's theme, and I wondered if you could talk about the inspiration and any future, and I would love a film of that too.
Thank you very much for those kind remarks. Thank you. I very much enjoyed writing Laz Orchestra. What actually happened was that the BBC approached me, and they were doing a festival of orchestras in Britain, radio series, BBC Radio 3, and they wanted 13 3-minute talks. And could I please do that? And so I thought, my goodness, how am I going to get 13 3-minute talks? Can't say very much, obviously, in 3 minutes. And so I thought I'd write a story and divide it into 13 bits. And it was therefore appropriate, since it was a festival of orchestras that was being broadcast, it was appropriate to talk about an orchestra and music. And that coincided with my interest in, I had been reading and had been interested for some time in what had happened with the Polish forces in the Second World War. And so I wrote this short story, and it was effectively just a very brief story with these 13 very short episodes about Lara, who sets up a little amateur orchestra with members of the air base coming and playing, members of the services coming and playing during the dark days of the Second World War, set in eastern England in Suffolk, which is a very beautiful part of England. And so I wrote that, and I so liked the story that I decided to make a novel of it, and so I sat down and wrote the complete novel. And one of the things, as I say, that I wanted to write about was not only how music could help people in times of crisis, and how music can have a healing effect, which I believe it does have, but also I wanted to say something about the Poles, because it seemed to me that the Poles had such misfortune in that period, and indeed subsequently. I had talked to somebody I knew who had actually served in the RAF during the war. He said that at the time of the altar, he and his fellow officers couldn't look his fellow Polish officers in the face because their country had been sold down the river. And these were very brave men, and many of them actually fought in the Battle of Britain. They actually flew in the Battle of Britain with Polish squadrons. And so this was a tribute, in a sense, to them. And I was also so ashamed really by the fact that at the end of the war, Stalin applied pressure to prevent the Polish servicemen from participating in the victory parade in London. And these very brave men stood on the sidewalks and wept. And that was, historically, was set right, not until, I think it was 1995 or towards the end of the 20th century, when the British government said, we'll have a ceremony, and they got Polish veterans, and they put them up at the top, and they went and laid wreaths. But it took a long time for that monstrous injustice to be addressed. And so I wanted to write about all of this, and the result was Laz Orchestra, which thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, ladies and gentlemen.
As you can see, Alexander McCall Smith, we salute you. We have a small gift for you that we hope can fit into your suitcase. it's a token of our appreciation for your coming out this way. And again, thank you so very, very much for imparting your wisdom with us.